my name is Rebecca Richardson, but most people call me Becky, and welcome to another video. I'm going to start by addressing a few things. One, I tried to look like a skeleton. I really, there was effort put in. I wanted it to look like a skeleton because it's spooky season, but instead I feel I look more like the guy who does the stupid death section of Horrible Histories. But I did try. Secondly, there is no light. If you watched the video posted before this, you will have seen the issues I was having with the lighting outside. This is being filmed on the same day, so we have the same light issue. So I've just closed the curtains because this is a spooky video, and so I feel that, you know, the lack of lighting maybe works somehow for this. If not, I'm sorry. Today we're going to be talking about some character deaths that actually wrecked me and made me cry like a baby. And so I am going to start this video just by mentioning the series that I'm going to be covering in this, because obviously it's about character deaths. It's a very spoilery topic. Nobody wants to be spoiled. So if you don't want to be spoiled and you haven't read any of the series I'm about to mention, then maybe come back to this video when you have. The series mentioned in this video are The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, The Infernal Devices, The Mortal Instruments, The Dark Artifices, Crooked Kingdom, and Throne of Glass. Already, if you've read any of those, you probably know who I'm going to be talking about. There are 10 character deaths I'd like to talk about. Not in any particular order, I just have the books and we're just going to go through them in the order they're there and talk about all of these incredibly sad deaths. So I've let in a bit of light before we start. I've let in a slight bit of light to try and stop the pixelated screen that you're probably seeing, because obviously when it's dark that's too much. Obviously when it's dark the screen gets more pixelated, so we probably still have that issue, but I'm doing my best. You see, as soon as the windows open, that's what happens, because I don't know what's happening with the sun today. Might be a bit better. I'm sorry, there's not really anything I can do about it. Anyway, back to the point of the video. The first character death I would like to discuss is Finnick O'Dare. This takes me back quite a bit. I think I was 12 when I read the Hunger Games series, and out of the few major deaths within the series, Finnick's was definitely the saddest to read about. This was probably because Finnick was one of my favourite characters, but also the scenes leading up to his death were just so freaky for me at the age of 12. Before he dies, I'm assuming you've read the book if you already made it this far into the video, but to explain anyway, in case you want to be spoiled and you haven't actually read the book yet. The scenes leading up to Finnick's death, they are in the tunnels, the sort of sewage system running below the Capitol, and there's these mutts, which are just big lizard things at this point, whispering Katniss's name from afar, and that scared me so much when I was 12 reading it, and they're all just Katniss, and I was like, no thank you. And then they're being chased by them, and I was already in a bad state of mind. But then more the lead up to it as well, the actual moment, everybody's being attacked, and I was like, somebody's gonna die here, surely somebody's gonna die here. And then Finnick gets dragged down, and then there's that moment where I just knew that this was going to be when they were going to pull out the nightlock thing that Katniss has, where she says nightlock 3 times and it blows up. I could feel it coming. I was like, that's how this is gonna go. I don't want that to be how this goes. And of course that was how the scene went, and I was so incredibly sad. I hated that scene so much. In the movie it's worse because you get to hear him screaming, which just wasn't an exciting experience. Somebody was sharing actually the scene from the movie where Finnick dies, and I forgot that he bounces, he falls, hits something metal, bounces off the metal and into the water, and then there's a strong 10 seconds of him screaming, and I was just a mess. In the movies, it might be a slightly different thing, to be fair, as much as that whole scene was very sad. I think the main movie death that got to me was Rue. I don't know why I didn't find Rue as sad in the books, probably just because I think there's something about that scene in the movie where Katniss is singing to her that just makes it 10 times worse, and I cry every time I watch that movie. Prim is also another death from these books that was sad, but I always felt like that came too quick and was too sudden for me to be sad about it. Instead, I was just kind of shocked about it. So definitely in the books, Finnick was such a sad death, and is a death that I will never get over. The next death we're going to be talking about in this lovely morbid video is Sebastian Morgenstern in City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. So, Sebastian is the villain. Obviously, he's a very bad guy, but he's also one of my favourite villains ever. In fact, he's possibly my favourite villain ever, because of his character and because of the fact that I cried like a baby when he died. He's a villain, you're not supposed to do that. There's just something about his character and the fact that he himself is also a victim of his dad, Valentine, that's just so horrifically sad about his person. The reason he's evil is because there's demon blood running through his veins, and when he dies, you see him briefly without that demon blood, and that is what made it so sad. If he just died an evil man, I probably wouldn't have been too sad. It would have been bittersweet because you still know that he could have been a better person. But because you see him return to his actual self for a moment, and he says something to Jocelyn and Clary along the lines of, "I've never felt so light," and then he dies, and I just cried so hard. He deserved a redemption arc. I hate to be the person to say it. He should have just become a better person and then had his redemption arc. The same way that when Jem was stabbed, he actually just like lost the stuff in him that made him a silent brother and all the infern like burned from his system and he was just Jem. Sebastian should have just had the demon blood burned from him and we should have seen him have some sort of redemption arc instead of him dying and his body being treated like every other villain and him just being talked about as an evil person for the rest of the time instead of the victim he was. It makes me so annoyed. I really wish we could see more villain redemption arcs in YA, and we're actually going to talk about another one of those next. In a very similar situation to Sebastian Morgenstern, the next character death I'd like to discuss is the Darkling in Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. I know not long ago I was slagging off the Darkling, and I will continue to slag off the Darkling because he's not the best villain I've come across, but when he died, suddenly he was a lot better a villain than I had thought he was for 3 books. The Darkling, of course, if you haven't read the series, you might have noticed I'm not describing the plot of the books just because based on the little preface I had to give at the beginning, I'm assuming if you're here, you either have no plan on reading the book or have already read the book. So there's no point in me really explaining the plot. But the Darkling, in case you haven't read this, is the villain, and he is in general quite a generic villain for most of the series. He just wants to take over the world. I do like the aspect of him that comes from his motive and the fact that he wants to do these things because he wants to make his country better. Still doesn't make him a good reason. You know, if I was going to say that makes him a decent person, then I could also use the same justification on Hitler, which obviously we're not going to be doing. So it's not really a justification, but it is a motive that I like to see and it's something that you can understand, which I always prefer villains that can be understood. However, when he died, I suddenly became so sad. I wasn't attached to his character, and then when he was dying, suddenly I was very attached to his character and I started crying, and it came out of absolutely nowhere, and I think it is mainly because of the scene. I think there was a lot that I misunderstood about his character throughout it that suddenly became more prominent, I think, when he died. Again, if you haven't read this, when the Darkling dies, he is stabbed by the main character, Alina, and he bleeds to death at her feet, but whilst he's dying, he says a lot of things. I believe among those things are a plea to not actually be buried in a grave because then people could, of course, mess with the grave. But he also asks Alina to say his name, which for whatever reason just really got to me. I hadn't liked this guy for so long, and then suddenly when he was dying and he just wanted to hear his name again, I understood a lot more about him in those last few moments. And I think it came down to the fact that at the end of the day, he is just a lonely boy. And that was what really got to me. I use the word boy lightly, though, to be fair, because he's over 500 years old. But I do think there's a certain symbolism in the fact he's supposed to look about 20 that, again, I didn't really understand until that moment. And I was like, oh, he's a boy. That was kind of the vibe I got from it. And when he just asks Alina to say his name and all that kind of suddenly made sense, I was just like, oh, and suddenly I felt so sad. And then I believe, I can't remember his exact last line, but it's something along the lines of him not wanting to be alone. And I just completely broke down. I just started crying, and it was such a shock to me because the page beforehand I just hadn't cared about him at all. I'd been like, can we just kill him and get on with this? And then he was dying and suddenly I cared so much, and there was tears streaming down my face and I was trying not to cry. It was a mess. I know that it's not necessarily permanent. I haven't read King of Scars yet, but I just I was very sad, and I really hope with news of the TV show that Ben Barnes can pull it off, which I think he will. I don't know if it'll hit differently because he doesn't look 20, and I was saying about the symbolism in that. I don't know whether I'll get that same vibe from it with Ben Barnes, but I'm really hoping that they pull that scene off just so I can cry all over again, I guess. The 4th death on this list of dead people, I guess, is Will Herondale in Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare. Will was never my favourite. Just none of the Herondales are my favourite. I feel other than Kit and Lucy, they all have the exact same personality. So it wasn't ever my favourite, but I really got so upset when he died. And I don't really know why with this one. I knew it was coming as soon as it did the skip forward in time. I was like, oh, like, Tessa's alone, we must be, like, getting something about Will's death. And the more detail it went into, the sadder I got. I suppose it's okay because he died a happy death, like, he lived a long life and then he got to die of old age, surrounded by everybody he loved, and even Jem was there. I think that's why I cried. So yeah, I didn't think that Will Herondale would actually be a death I'd cry at. Like, I thought I'd be a bit sad when I could see it coming to. I was like, oh, this is like Will's death. But, like, I wasn't expecting to actually tear up at it. And even now, whenever I see, like, extracts from that scene, I just, like, feel myself tearing up. Even though it's not a big scene, he's not murdered, he doesn't have some horrible death, he dies happily surrounded by those he loves. Yet, I think mainly because we got it from Tessa's perspective as well, it was just really sad. So yeah, I think the last three on this list have proved that they don't have to be your favourite characters to make you cry when they die. Also, the light's gone again, by the way, because if I open my curtain slightly, it goes straight into my eyeball. So, darkness it is. The fifth character death on this list is Livi Blackthorne in Lord of Shadows by Cassandra Clare. I'm not gonna lie, this didn't make me as sad as I thought it would, possibly because I already knew somebody on the Dan and Phil tag on Tumblr of all things. This is like a few years ago. I was just minding my own business, scrolling through the Dan and Phil Tumblr tag, and then just out of nowhere there was this post that was like, Livi Blackthorne dies. And it was just so random, and I was so annoyed about it. So I already knew it was coming, and so I was kind of preparing, like, the whole way through the series. I was like, Livi's gonna die, Livi's gonna die. And when she did die, it was sad, but it wasn't, like, as sad, like I said, as I expected it to be. It was sad when she was speaking to Ty. That was the bit that really got me, like, at first, when she turned to speak to Ty before she died. That was, like, the worst bit. And the build-up as well, when I could see it coming, I was like, we're right at the end of the book, this has to be it. Like, the tension I felt in that moment, knowing a child was about to die, just wasn't great. But the worst bit was definitely after she died and Julian was like holding her limp body and trying to get her to wake up. That paired with the fact that in the background of that scene, Alec was also trying to get his dead dad to wake up. Bearing in mind, Alec is my favourite fictional character. I couldn't quite wrap my brain around Alec crying and Julian crying at the same time. Like, something just happened to my brain. It just shot wired and was like, we're out of here. This is far too much. It just wasn't good. This is a theme that we will see again, this idea of not crying when they're dying, but crying when people are reacting to their death, because it did just absolutely rip me apart, that particular scene, and all of the fallout in Queen of Air and Darkness. It wasn't great. Every now and then, somebody online will just, like, quote what Julian was saying to her dead body to me, and I'm like, stop, we're not doing this today. And that's why this particular one is on the list, because, oh my god, was that entire scene overwhelming. Another death that made me cry, not because of the actual death, but because of the fallout, is Cedric Diggory in The Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. Cedric was like my favourite character when I first watched the movies, mainly because of the fact that he died, which sounds so stupid, but when I was like 12, I think, when I first watched this, Cedric was the first person I'd ever seen die on screen, and that kind of like had an effect on me, but like a good one, because he like died saving people, and I ended up keeping that with me, and that's kind of why he became a favourite character over time, because of that. But what was sad about his death wasn't his actual death, but it was the bit where his father is crying over his body. Oh my god, that was awful. That whole bit in The Goblet of Fire, and even before he realises, that awful scene where Harry brings back Cedric's body and everybody's like cheering and there's trumpets playing and there's all of this like celebratory music happening and there's just a dead body, like there's a dead child on the field and they're all like, oh yeah, party, and there's like horns, and Harry's just there like, he's dead. And that painful like 10 seconds before Fleur starts screaming, where they're all just celebrating, is possibly the hardest part of the entire series for me to watch, just because it's so awkward. But then of course it gets worse when everybody realises, and I remember watching it for the first time and just thinking, Cedric's dad is somewhere in that audience and he's going to realise that his son is dead, and then he does, and he just starts crying, and oh, it was awful. I just hated it so much. When I read the book, like after I'd watched the movies, of course I knew it was coming. Didn't mean it was any less sad, because it was just as sad. Cedric deserved so much better, and that's something that I will always say. Like, it frustrates me so much, his death, for some reason. I'm always just like, he should have lived. He deserved so much better, which I think is why I struggled a bit with The Cursed Child as well, where suddenly they were claiming he would have become a Death Eater. Like, no. But yeah, that's why Cedric made this list, because it was just so sad. The 7th death on this list is Sirius Black in Order of the Phoenix by J.K. Rowling. This, when I first watched the movie, I didn't think was too sad for some reason. I think it's just how, like, simple Sirius's death is. And I suppose when you're younger, I wasn't really thinking, like, oh my god, that was Harry's father figure. Like, I was like, oh, that guy died. It wasn't as big or, like, dramatic. However, when I read this book and the times I've watched the movie afterwards, it's just much more sad now. I think mainly because Sirius is Harry's father figure, and up until that point, you kind of have this sense of happiness, like, because you know that, like, Sirius is there for him, and you kind of feel better for Harry because he's like, oh, he finally has an actual family member. And then for him to just be taken away like that just wasn't fair. And I think the simplicity of the way he just kind of, like, falls through the veil makes it worse. Like, at first, because it wasn't dramatic, it didn't bother me. But when I watch it now, there's just something extra to how simple and easy his death is, the way he just, like, falls into the veil, like, very, like, gently. And of course, again, afterwards, when people are sad and Harry's crying, that bit when people react to a death is always so hard to watch or read about. And as much as I didn't cry really when Sirius died, I, like, teared up a bit, but I didn't cry. I think the entire scene and the fact that I did tear up a bit makes it worthy of being on this list. There is, however, no more Harry Potter deaths on this list, because if we were going to get into the Deathly Hallows, we'd be here a while, so I decided just to miss that out. But you know, you know who died in the Deathly Hallows. It wasn't great. The 8th death on this rather long list at this point is the 13 in Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J Maas. I'm including them all as one death. The 13 are just like one death now in this. But this, I actually cried. This was one of the few books on the list where, like, proper tears. I was sobbing, like, actually sobbing. My bottom lip was wobbling and there was, like, tears in my eyes whilst I was trying to read that scene. It was horrendous. I couldn't even give you a reason why exactly this was so sad in comparison to others. I think it was just that I saw it coming when Astrid was talking to Manon, and there was that moment where she was quite clearly trying to say goodbye and something just clicked, and I was like, they're gonna do that weird witchy thing where they blow themselves up. That's what's gonna happen. And then when all of the 13 just flew off and left Manon to watch as they blew themselves up, oh, it was awful. And the bit before they actually blew up, when they were just throwing themselves at the witches and being stabbed and things, and you have this description from Manon's point of view where she's just watching them all hit the ground and, like, fall around the tower, and Asterin has a scar out, and it was just so difficult. And then they all blow up. And I just couldn't deal with it. I was, like, actually crying. Whilst I was reading the battle before they blow up, I was sobbing just knowing what was coming. It was so bad. It was a lot of character deaths to deal with at once, especially when Astrid was one of my favourites. And I could see it coming, and it just got worse and worse, and I was crying. And yeah, it was overwhelming, I think, for 12 characters to die in one scene. And it was actually this book that motivated me to make this video. I read this back in April, maybe, and it was in that moment when I finished it and I was still, like, teary-eyed that I was like, gotta make a video about this at some point, because it was just too sad not to mention. And I, like, hate Sarah J Maas for it, but I also love her for it because I like a book to make me cry, and it definitely happened. It worked. The 9th death on this list is Matthias Helva from Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Matthias was never my favourite. If anything, I actually wasn't really a fan of him. I did like his character development that we saw him go through throughout Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. But did I really like him as a person? Not particularly. At first, because he was awfully annoying and so lawful good. I don't like lawful good characters. But also just because he was kind of boring. Partly because he was the lawfully good character. But this is another one of those cases where his death and people's reactions to it were actually sadder than him dying. The bit that got me with this is definitely Nina's reaction to him dying. There's that bit where she tries to reanimate him briefly, and then just everybody else's reactions. And the bit right at the end when they're putting him on the boat with Nina, that was the worst bit. For some reason, that bit when they're all saying goodbye at the end and, like, everybody's starting to go separate ways and Nina has to take Matthias onto the boat, that just, like, actually made me cry. More because of what it meant and the way that it showed everybody going their separate ways, more than the fact that Matthias was actually dead. But nevertheless, it was a sad moment, and I do think I'll probably cry when Nina appears in King of Scars, because I do know that she's in the book, and I do think that will be really hard to read. The fact that I'm smiling whilst I'm filming this video really says something about me, doesn't it? Can we open the windows? Do you see why we're having to deal with the pixelated screen because of the darkness over that? The final death on this list is Noah Cherney from The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. I think the most obvious one out of The Raven King to speak about would be Gansey. However, Gansey's death wasn't really sad because, like, A, we knew it was coming from book one, and B, it was so incredibly rushed and, like, over with so quickly, and nobody was sad about it. He died and they were all just like, well, there's a body in the field now. Like, that was kind of it. And so I didn't find that sad. Noah, however, was very sad. I did know Noah was going to die before I read the series, but the way that it happened, I think, is what made it 10 times worse. Honestly, if I didn't know he was going to die beforehand, I probably wouldn't have picked up on the fact that he was dead, because all you really get is this really confusing moment where he's talking to, like, 10-year-old Gansey, and then it just says that he slowly slipped from time or something, and I don't think if I'd known, I probably would have just been like, what is going on right now, like, where's he gone, kind of thing. But knowing, it made it extra sad. And I think that's also down to the fact that a lot of Noah's character is the fact that he wants to be remembered. There's that whole bit where he's writing murdered across the car and then Ronan replaces it with the word remembered. And all those little bits where you see him so clearly mourning the life that was taken away from him, and just the fact that he wants to be remembered and he wants his family to remember him as a good person. The fact that when he dies, he's forgotten about, not only does he slip from time, but he slips from the memory of all the other characters. That just makes it so sad. The fact that all he wanted was to be remembered, and just like that, his friends and his family have no idea who he was, and it's like he didn't even exist. And that's just, God, it's awful. Noah deserved so much better than he got. The treatment he had in the series wasn't great, and I just wish he'd got better. He deserved better, even if he was rather freaky at times. But I do think that's what made his death so sad, was the fact that not only did he die, but he would never be remembered. And also, somebody pointed out the fact that the only people who knew where he was buried were his friends, because they, like, reburied him in the forest. So when they forget about him, nobody knows where his body is. Nobody has any way of knowing where Noah was buried. But then again, does it matter, because nobody even knows he existed? So therefore nobody's looking for him, because they don't even know that a boy was buried. They don't know who he is. And it's just, oh, it's just so sad. That's why Noah made this list as far as this book is concerned, and not Gansey, because Gansey's death was rushed and over with in about 5 seconds, whereas Noah's death will be something that I think every fan will be thinking about, even reading the Dreamer trilogy, because as far as I know, he's not mentioned at all, because they don't remember him, and that's just going to be something that plays on my mind as I'm reading it. In conclusion, Noah deserved better. And on that note, that is the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you not only put up with the horrific lighting and whatever's happening with my face, but also if you managed to deal with that right to the end of the video, if you're still sat here watching me now. Please feel free to discuss any of these in the comments down below, although spoiler warnings, of course, would be very nice, thank you. But on that, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon. Bye!